you were present at a moment when Trump suggested executing the person who leaked information that he went to the White House bunker when those George Floyd protests were happening outside the White House.
The president would lose his temper and say things like that. I doubt he would have actually carried it out. I don't, we have regulations coming fast and furious, so telling people what kind of stoves they can use and what kinds of cars they have to drive, and eliminating cars and so forth. Yeah, those are the threats to democracy.
Is worse than subverting the peaceful transfer of power?
Did he succeed?
CNN Rising star Kaitlan Collins gave her best interview yet and a masterclass performance in journalistic responsibility when, for 30 minutes, she grilled Donald Trump's former Attorney General Bill Barr and challenged him to reconcile his criticism of Trump with his decision to support Trump in the upcoming election. It was brutal, it was relentless, and some of Barr's answers will shock you. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bell before you go. I'd greatly appreciate it. All right, friends, we have several clips to play in this video. The entire conversation between Kaitlan Collins and Bill Barr lasted between 25 to 30 minutes, I believe. It was a masterclass. It was riveting from start to finish. Kaitlan Collins was on her A game, and I encourage you to check the whole thing out. But several clips have gone viral already because it was a stunning, just a stunning situation between Collins and Barr. Some of the things that Barr said, the shocking, naked partisanship and cynicism from a guy who thinks Trump is a buffoon who's unfit for office, staggering stuff. We're going to start with the first clip, though, which is actually relevant. I mean, many of the questions were tied to the recent Supreme Court oral arguments in which Trump's attorney asserted that Donald Trump is entitled to sell nuclear codes to foreign adversaries, assassinate his political rivals, and even stage a coup. Bill Barr, a lifelong conservative and attorney who believes in robust executive power, pushed back on a lot of that. I mean, clearly disagrees with it. But he also validated some of the claims that have recently come out suggesting that Trump really does want to murder those who dislike him.
I hear from a lot of Republicans who defend Trump saying, well, that's a hypothetical and that's ridiculous. But Alyssa Farah Griffin, who was Trump's communications director, posted yesterday and said that you were present at a moment when Trump suggested executing the person who leaked information that he went to the White House bunker when those George Floyd protests were happening outside the White House. Do you remember that?
I remember him being very mad about that. I actually don't remember him saying executing, but I wouldn't dispute it. I mean, it doesn't sound. The president would lose his temper and say things like that. I doubt he would have actually carried it out. I don't.
But he would say that on other occasions? You said
the president, the president had I think people sometimes took him too literally, and he would say things like similar to that in occasions to blow off steam. But I wouldn't take him literally every time he did it.
Why not?
Because at the end of the day, it wouldn't be carried out, and you could talk sense.
But just because it's not carried out and you could talk sense into him, doesn't that still mean that the threat is there?
Folks, that's stunning. The Attorney General, the former Attorney General of the United States, a lifelong conservative Republican who thinks that Trump is unfit for office but will nonetheless back him anyway, says he won't dispute the characterization that Trump repeatedly threatened and expressed a desire to kill people who annoyed him as the sitting president. And Bill Barr said, even if I can't recall that specific example, I don't dispute it because Trump would say things like that all the time. And then the very next sentence, he would try to downplay it. Barr's like, well, I mean, he would just let off some steam. The most powerful man in the world talking brazenly to top advisors and White House staff about wielding state power to murder people he doesn't like. And we're supposed to, well, don't worry about it because it wasn't carried out. That's a recurring theme with Bill Barr, by the way, throughout this interview. He constantly says, listen, sure, Trump has these authoritarian impulses, but I'm not worried about it, or not worried about it as much because the first time he was president, nobody carried the stuff out. But that's the whole point. Donald Trump says in round 2, if he's elected to a second term, he will appoint people who will carry that stuff out, who are not like Bill Barr, who occasionally show backbone. Backbone Bill Barr somehow can't seem to find now. Got some more clips to play as well.
Name one thing that Biden has done that's worse than that.
I think his whole administration is a disaster for the country.
Is worse than subverting the peaceful transfer of power?
Did he succeed?
Only because Vice President Mike Pence stood in the way, and now the people who are lining
He
up to
tried
be
to
VP again say that they will not do what Mike Pence did.
So Bill Barr, throughout the conversation, we'll play a clip here too, where she grills him on it, and he tries to give examples to justify why he thinks that President Biden is the greater threat to democracy. He doesn't deny that Trump is a threat to democracy, but he's like, listen, the Biden administration is a greater threat to democracy. And Kaitlan Collins is like, okay, name me something that is worse than Donald Trump shattering a 230 plus year tradition of the peaceful transfer of power, which is arguably the single most important political tradition since the founding of this country, the thing that distinguished us from the time of the founding from basically every other nation on earth. The precedent established by President Washington and then carried through again with President Adams, transferring power to Thomas Jefferson, President Jefferson, a political rival. It was remarkable. And some of the examples that Bill Barr is about to give you will shock you. The things that he was like, well, this is worse than subverting the peaceful transfer of power. Some of the examples will shock you. But even his answer in that clip, well, Trump didn't succeed. Again, I go back to, there's the Sideshow Bob. I'm not a big fan of The Simpsons, but there's this viral Sideshow Bob clip from The Simpsons where the Sideshow Bob, the murderous clown, is complaining about being jailed for attempted murder. He's like, attempted murder. What is this? Do they give out a Nobel Prize for attempted physics? It's gross. The fact that Trump was too stupid to succeed, or the fact that Trump's the people who Trump immediately needed help from managed to find their backbone, like Mike Pence, to defy him. Trump doesn't get credit for that, especially when Trump says he's going to intentionally seek out others who will not do what Vice President Mike Pence and others did. But let's get to some of the examples where Bill Barr is trying to justify desperately, and he knows he's doing it poorly, to try to justify his vote for Trump over Biden. These are the things that Bill Barr says are the real threat to democracy.
I think a country, all the things together, like we're not enforcing our borders. We have open borders. We have lawlessness in our cities. We have regulations coming fast and furious, so telling people what kind of stoves they can use and what kinds of cars they have to drive, and eliminating cars and so forth. Those are the threats to democracy.
You can even tell, again, Bill Barr's not an idiot. He's really not. He's a smart guy. You can tell he's looking down because as the words are leaving his mouth, you can see it in real time. He's like, holy crap, this sounds so deranged and stupid and indefensible. And it is. Listen to some of the examples where we have an open border. That's not true. Even if you think President Biden isn't doing enough at the southern border, characterization I will dispute, we have record contacts, record drug seizures, record deportations, record arrests by the Biden administration at the southern border. You can say it's insufficient, but it's not open by definition if what they're doing at the border in terms of arrests and interdictions is higher than it's ever been. It is by definition not open, by definition. Then he says regulations. So Bill Barr is the sort of person that when federal seatbelt laws were passed in this country, he was probably pulling his hair. Oh my God, this is fascism. Fascism is when seatbelts. Not subverting the peaceful transfer of power, not staging an insurrection, nothing like that. Of course, it was his guy doing it. It was a Republican doing it. It's when a Democrat passes regulations. They're trying to take your stove away. We've talked about that in previous videos. This Senator Marsha Blackburn culture war nonsense, stupid stuff leaving the mouth of such a distinguished, even though I despise the man, a distinguished conservative, attorney general like Bill Barr. President Biden hasn't taken anybody's stoves away. This is Ron DeSantis nonsense culture war BS. Bill Barr might as well be complaining, the green M&M is wearing sneakers instead of high heels. That's the real threat to democracy, and Joe Biden's behind it all. How is Joe Biden behind that? He says there's lawlessness in the cities. Number one, you need to point to something that the Biden administration has done if we grant the premise. Number two, we don't have to grant the premise because across this country, crime rates from violent crime, robbery, murder has declined. It spiked when Bill Barr was Attorney General. Crime spiked in this country in 2020, but that was under Donald Trump and Bill Barr. It has declined year over year over year under the Biden administration. So he's just lying, and you can see it on his face how stupid it sounds. But this is probably the culmination out of all of it. And by the way, I'll point out, in this interview, Kaitlan Collins pushes back on it. She's like, wait a minute. Even if what you say is true, how is regulating gas stoves and saying that we're eventually going to phase out a certain type of car for the sake of the environment, again, not happening right now, how is that equal to, how is that even remotely in the vicinity of trying to subvert the peaceful transfer of power? And Bill Barr can't answer. So Kaitlan Collins is on him. But this is probably the culmination of it. This is towards the end of the interview where she sums up. She's like, listen, so I just want to be super clear about this. This is the Chris Sununu moment from ABC's This Week. This is basically what George Stephanopoulos did to Chris Sununu. Caitlin Collins does it to Bill Barr. And like Sununu, the Republican governor of New Hampshire, Bill Barr gives an absolutely shameless answer.
So just to be clear, you're voting for someone who you believe tried to subvert the peaceful transfer of power, that can't even achieve his own policies, that lied about the election even after his attorney general told him that the election wasn't stolen. And as the former chief law enforcement in this country, you're going to vote for someone who is facing 88 criminal counts.
Well, look, the 88 criminal counts, a lot of those are, and I've said...
Even if 10 of them are accurate.
The answer to the question is yes. I'm supporting the Republican ticket.
But can you say that you're voting for Donald Trump? Because you're not saying his name. You just say you're supporting the Republican ticket.
I've said as between Biden and Trump, I will vote for Trump.
Folks, Bill Barr, I mean, I'm going to give you some Twitter reactions that really stood out to me. So this one, it was from Matt Flammable. The year is 2027. Trump, at the end of his second term, decides he wants to stay for another. The Supreme Court has given him absolute immunity to do so. He just orders special forces to kill his rival and the rival's family. Bill Barr.
Yeah. It's classic Trump.
That's part of the segment in which Kaitlan Collins reads a tweet from Donald Trump about Bill Barr in the aftermath of Barr's endorsement, where Trump repeatedly insults him again. And Bill Barr just, that's what Trump does, Pathetic. Mehdi Hassan says, what a pathetic, whiny, cowardly, dishonest, partisan little man Bill Barr is. He has replaced Ted Cruz as the most shameless, supine, and self-hating Trump supporter. There's more. Jasmine Crockett, one of my favorite freshman Democrats. So the Attorney General of the United States heard a sitting president speak of killing people, and it was no big deal to him. Bill Barr said, of course I'd vote for Trump again. He's not the threat. It's the liberals and their appliance agenda. Yes, he referenced appliances and freedom and not a peep about, the women dying in this country because they don't have bodily autonomy. But what about those stoves? I know we've been talking about Bill Barr a lot here lately, but it's because a lot's happened with some of these outspoken Trump critics, like, again, Republican Governor Chris Sununu and Attorney General Bill Barr. For much of 2023, Bill Barr would publicly criticize Donald Trump in very blunt terms. He went viral repeatedly, pissed off a lot of Republicans, a lot of MAGA Republicans in particular, because just very bluntly, he wouldn't say, Trump could have done better. No, he would say some pretty harsh but accurate things about Trump. So for Barr, like Sununu, to turn around and say, none of that matters because I have policy disagreements with the Democratic Party. So Democrats wanting to reduce, the carbon emissions from gas stoves because there's medical basis to believe that it's contributing to major health risks. But they're not going in and stealing your stove from you. They are just proposing regulatory changes, which, by the way, the types of regulatory changes that happened in previous Republican administrations. Bill Barr was Attorney General for George H.W. Bush. They passed these types of regulations. George W. Bush passed these types of regulations. It's nothing new with the Biden administration, but Trump has just created some sort of brain rot within even Republicans like Bill Barr who know better and think, damn, if you regulate anything, that's fascism. Fascism is when we have more efficient stoves, when we eventually phase out a certain type of car, when we impose seatbelt requirements. That's fascism. That's fascism to Bill Barr. Not when the chief executive denies a free and fair election, lies to the American people, lies to his cult, sicks them on the United States Capitol after trying to litigate his way into a second unelected term, never conceding the election. All these things that Bill Barr's criticized, the real issue, Bill Barr says, are stoves. This is why I do not take the modern Republican Party seriously, not in terms of their ideas. Certainly, I recognize that they're dangerous, but there is no rational basis for this. This is a false equivalence in the extreme. Liz Cheney has condemned what Bill Barr has had to say, and Liz Cheney, like Bill Barr, is a lifelong conservative. But Bill Barr, at the end of the day, cares much more about his party than he does his country. That is a fact. It's not up for debate. Anyone who has that debate will lose the debate because it's simply true. That's why I have nothing but contempt for this modern Republican Party in terms of its elected officials, people like Chris Sununu and Bill Barr, who know better and who have said they'd know better. But at the end of the day, they care more about partisan politics than the future of this country. They deserve nothing but your contempt and disrespect. Let me know what you think in the comments.